This is the Emotional Horsemanship Podcast. I am Lockie Phillips, your host. Emotional Horsemanship coaches deeply caring horse people to train emotionally balanced horses with science, empathy, and feel. And this is the podcast dedicated to exploring all of that within. We try to innovate horse training that puts the horse first. Season 2 of this podcast brings us solo episodes, special guests, and small groups of guests as we discuss horses, horse training, the equestrian industry, and the big, beautiful ideas that horses inspire in us always. My guest on the podcast is equine dissectionist Becks Nairns. Becks Nairns lives in New Zealand. She's also a breeder and a rider and a trainer and a horse mum and a mum. And she was on season 1 of the podcast with an episode called Feels Like Honest to the Bone. That episode is still the most downloaded episode of this podcast, and I still hear people refer to it over and over again. Yet I think on that first podcast, we barely scratched the surface. So this is a deeper look at Honest to the Bone with equine dissectionist Becks Nairns. Becks Nairns, thank you so much for returning to the podcast. Very, very happy to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So our first episode, we didn't know each other very well, but we had commented and shared stuff and you were very, very open. So I brought you over because I was interested in what you were doing. And our first episode, which was called Feels Like Honest to the Bone, is still the most listened to and most downloaded episode that I've put out so far. No pressure that this has to live up to that, but I think we only started to scratch the surface on your work and the implications it has for us as horse people. So, shall we get into it?
Yeah, let's dive in. It's a big topic.
So we know you're a dissectionist. We know that you're an atypical dissectionist because you come into dissection work through being a woman of the land. So you know how to butcher animals for your own meat. You know how to taxidermy animals. So you are a taxidermist, right? Taxidermist, you were. And so you got into dissection work through that lens. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. But you're also a breeder and a dressage trainer. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I realized quite early on in my career, really due to financial constraints, but also because I didn't want to be taking on other people's problems. And I really enjoy the whole process of horses, right? And to me, starting horses, breaking in horses, whatever you want to call it, that process for me starts on day one. And I don't think that you can beat the relationship piece that you have with a horse when you've known them their entire life. So that made sense to me. So I bought my first stallion when I was 18, and I've really consistently bred horses right through to now. I'm turning 40 this year. So it's been a career. But that's sort of been my process with breeding horses and why I've done it that way. And I always say to people, like, if you're serious about horses, you really need to be breeding your own so that you can see the whole process. It never made sense to me, like I started horses for other people, but I always felt uncomfortable with the process because it feels like almost a betrayal to the horse to get them to the stage where they're ready to start, and then you send them away to some stranger and be like, like, I struggle with that. So I stopped breaking in horses professionally for people 6 years ago now, and I have a very different process. So I instead prefer to support people through the process of starting their own horse, because I believe that that's the best outcome for a horse and a rider. And if people say to me that they don't want to go through that process, I really try to get them to think about whether or not they're actually ready to go to take that step to have a horse to start, because they go to the trainers and that trainer's a professional, and they come home and they still have to carry on with the horse, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is later. And I feel like it can be really the undoing for a lot of horses when people are completely underprepared for what that process is. So, it's been a really interesting journey with me because I feel that things have happened in the way that they've meant to happen. Do you know what I mean? And with the dissection work, that for me just felt like a natural progression of where my understanding of horses needed to go. And it's been confronting and it's been shocking, and there's been a massive emotional adjustment. And I've had a few, real soul-searching moments and had to really question what I'm doing myself as well, because it is confronting. But also it's really important, and I want to say this straight off the bat, that people need to appreciate that I'm looking at dysfunctional horses. I don't get a massive opportunity to look at horses that haven't been ridden. I think total out of my, I'm up to 82 horses now. My total was 6 horses that have never been ridden. So while those horses have been a startling difference between the heavily worked horses, it's not enough horses for me to say, with absolute confidence, that I suppose where I'm trying to go with this is that
you have a selection bias, is what you're saying. You're nodding to the recognition that there's a selection bias present in your work because you tend to work with horses who have fallen apart.
Correct. Exactly. And so it's really difficult I find it difficult to present the work on, platforms like Facebook and Patreon and all of that, and try and keep people in like a balanced perspective of what the work is. I'm looking at dysfunctional horses. That is what the job is. Do you know what I mean? So it's really difficult because I feel like I'm scaring a lot of people. And while I want people to be conscious and think about the effect that they're having on their horses, I think I said this on the last podcast, the point is not to arrive at the grave in pristine condition.
Right.
And that's the balance for me is, that's not what the work is about. So, and I had this, somebody popped up on my Facebook this week, I put one of my broodmares up and wrote a post about sensitive and hot horses. And somebody said, that mare's off in the left hind. And I said, well, a couple of things. She's 15. So you don't get to 15 without having a certain amount of probably joint breakdown. Something. That's right. And I don't think we should be micromanaging stuff like that, because the thing about joint health is that it's use it or lose it, right? Like the amount of synovial fluid, which is the protective lubrication for joints, is based on how much that joint is working.
Right.
And so if you've got slight changes, the best thing is not to just sit out in a tiny paddock and do no exercise. It's about doing the right amount of exercise to make sure that joint health is prolonged for as long as possible. And this person really hammered me, but it's fine. Like I've been living in the social media world for long enough now to know that we don't always have to agree. And, if you don't agree, well, that's fine too.
Yeah, it's the whole social media issue is a big one that I've spent a lot of time and energy tackling towards the end of last year. And I'm trying to move myself just personally off that subject because I'm so bored of boring commentators who come with an unbalanced perspective and with a determination of ignorance towards your situation and towards the post. I'm really tired of it. My analogy is if you're walking through a supermarket and someone comes up behind you and says, I don't like your tone. I don't like your jeans. I don't like your movement. I say, thank you for telling me. Stop following me.
Yeah.
Stop following me. Leave me alone. Stop following me. Leave me alone. Go away. You're not obligated to be here and to like it. No one has told you to be here.
No,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, and like the little bit you nodded to about training for the public, this is the problem that I've definitely seen, and I'm on the same page with you. Trainers take in horses that people send to them. The trainer develops a relationship to that horse sufficient that the horse is willing to learn from and with that trainer. Then as soon as there's a relationship present, the trainer proceeds to give the horse skills, mechanical skills, physical skills. This rein here puts that jaw there, etc., etc. But all of those physical skills are predicated on the relationship that trainer had with the horse. It's like a password protected iPhone. My iPhone opens for my face and my password only, right?
Yeah.
And then it works very well for me. And then you pass the animal back to the person. In this day and age, even the most competition focused rider still wants a relationship to their horse, right?
Yes.
Where they have an awareness that the horse enjoys their company, enjoys the work. They want the horse to give them signs and symbols that the horse likes them as the owner. And so the horse develops a relationship with this trainer that develops skills predicated on this relationship and then is passed back to the owner, who is essentially now a stranger to this horse. And the owner steps in and does all the mechanical symbols that the trainer installed in the horse. And the horse gives, at best, a ghost written copy of the mechanical skills that the trainer gave them, because the relationship isn't there. And then the owner says, well, damn. And then they call a relationship trainer like myself. And the relationship trainer says, well, the relationship that you have with this horse is not the same that your trainer has with the horse. So all of those mechanical skill sets, most of those mechanical skill sets probably won't apply to you. So you're going to have to start them from the beginning again. And that's a deeply jarring experience for the owner. And so I'm so with you that if you want to save a horse, try and keep them. And unless you've got a long-term relationship with that trainer and that trainer is able to nurture you over weeks, months, or years,
Yes,
in the transfer process, to be very cautious about sending horses off to trainers, and then you kind of delegate and abdicate. I think that only creates confusion for both the horse and the horse person. So I totally agree with you there. But aside from that tangent, Bex, the thing I like about you the most is that because you're a dissectionist and you're looking at these animals' bodies, that comes from a different lens. You're not beholden to the powers that be, right?
No.
You've got freedom. You're able to speak, and you're able to speak plainly.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword though, right? Because some people really like institutionalized learning.
Yep.
And I'm not that person. And I have been very honest on my platform because I don't want anybody to be following me under false pretenses. Like,
that's right.
The reason that I got into this work is because it felt like the natural progression of, working with the racehorses, because, a lot of people don't know that how I got into this work is because, I started a charity and we were, retraining and rehoming mainly standardbreds, but I'd done a lot of thoroughbreds in my history as well. And, I just couldn't understand why these horses couldn't end the program. And then, it just dawned on me one day, like, I actually had the skills to do this. This is really just, and people hate when I say this, but this is skilled butchery. And I've been butchering my own animals for a long time. Sustainable living is a big part of my life, and I started living in tiny homes that I built myself 6 years ago, and so that's my sideline aside from horses, right? I'm really interested in sustainable living for a couple of reasons. I always like to challenge myself mentally and physically, and so it all just sort of fitted in. And I remember sitting at the board meeting and sort of going through the numbers of how many horses weren't finishing the program, and I just don't understand. These are 3, 4, 5-year-old horses. They're not old horses. How can they be mentally and physically spent so much that they can't even become low-grade hacks? And so, I explained last time the process of, going and picking up a whole wool sack of horse bones. And I just quietly did it by myself at home. And at that point, I didn't really think anybody would be interested in it. And I certainly didn't think I'd be presenting my work the way that I do now. But it's just been a natural progression. And like, we said earlier, there are people who are worried to talk about this stuff for fear of being ridiculed. And that's not, I don't really care about that. Because
ridiculed or professionally disbarred somehow, or there's also big money involved in racing, and there's mafia involved in racing. And so I know there are some researchers out there who are deeply concerned about their personal safety in regards to what they put out there. I mean, it's pretty serious stuff. It can get very dark very quickly.
It is, yeah. Look, and I've certainly been sent threats. I have, one serious stalker who's been a problem for about 5 years, who actually, went to trouble to call people who know me. It's crazy. I'm not even going to get started down that track because it's so mental that I look like the crazy one. But
Right.
I know you've got experience with this, right? And it's
Yes.
These people are unhinged, and
Unhinged.
so yeah, they are unhinged. Like mentally happy people, they don't obsess over people to the level of stalking. Anyway, so it's look, I've done things on the online space for a long time, so you just get used to it. It's water off a duck's back. But I've tried to be really honest about that. I don't have any qualifications. It's QBE, qualified by experience, and my experience is still very much in the infancy. But the nice thing about coming at the dissections from the angle that I have is, I'm a writer. I'm very interested in biomechanics, and my background in rehabilitation work means that I see the asymmetries and the problems in the live horse, right? Because that's a big part of my work, is doing the assessments on the live horses. And I've built myself like a set of palpations and tests that I do on the horses to manipulate the body to see, firstly, how evenly the left and the right sides are, but also just to feel, different muscle groups and the skeletal landmarks that are on the horse that you can feel very easily from the outside. So I've developed quite an eye for dysfunction, and that in itself is quite hard, right? Because there's no such thing as the perfect horse.
Yeah. And also, nobody likes hearing that there might be something wrong with their horse, because they also feel that it's insinuating there's something wrong with them. If people have sticky enmeshment with their horses, it gets really sticky really quickly. And listen, not to put too fine a point on it, when I published your first episode, I was in the process of banking a bunch of recordings for the year with a bunch of my colleagues. And I had one colleague whom I love and adore, and I continue to love and adore them to this day, who did appear on the podcast, who started a conversation with me where it was very soft and it was very gentle prods and pokes and social cues in my direction in regards to your episode, saying something like, I'm cautious about appearing on the podcast that Becks has been on, and I can't answer questions about such and such in regards to her, or I can't have you mention her to me because I could get in trouble with such and such authority and blah, blah, blah. And I just said to them, I understand. But if that's what you want to do on my podcast, I am happy to not publish your episode at all, because this platform that I'm trying to build is a place for open, honest discussion of the plain facts. Human ego be damned. Human ego be damned. So if you want to try and manipulate that out of me, I will happily not put you on my podcast. Like, you don't need to be here,
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. And I can't speak for the rest of the world, but I do speak with vets when I'm traveling internationally, because a lot over my public dissections, I've had probably about 20 vets total now, and also human pathologists, scientists who work in cancer research, and also 2 doctors, because they don't get the opportunity to actually look at live tissue, right? When you go to medical school, you get given a cadaver that's been soaked in formaldehyde. There's nothing, everything's just yellow tissue because it's been preserved for the length of their their training. And in New Zealand, you in vet school, you get to do one dissection at the end of your training, and you just watch somebody do a dissection. And so, like, every vet that's come on my dissection has been like, I can't understand why we don't get this in our training. And from an anatomy perspective, they don't get a lot of training skeletally. Like, they certainly don't learn about the variations that are present in the skeleton on the standard course, and the variations that I see in skeletons is vast. It's crazy,
Okay.
And
so let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the variations you're seeing and the difference between malformation and variation, if you can.
Yeah, so look, there's been little study done into it, and when I talk about this stuff, I want to be really clear that this is in my opinion. That I haven't done a study yet. I do have some in the works that I would really like to do. But it's so much planning, it's so much in financial investment, and really I would probably have to crowdfund to do these research projects. And I do think that people would fund them. But back to the variation thing. So there's a lot of talk at the moment about ECVM, right, which stands for equine complex vertebral malformation. And what that basically is that in the cervical spine, so the neck of the horse, you've got two landmarks on C6 that are really, really important because they've got soft tissue attachments from the cervical spine onto the thoracic spine. And it's really about stabilizing the front end of the horse. The horses that I have dissected that have had ECVM, people tend to report that they trip in the front, that they're very unstable, and that it feels like riding, a horse that's a bit drunk in the front. They can't seem to trot a straight line. The reason it's complex is because it presents in many different ways. So you can have one or two tubercles under C6 missing, and then you can also have the serious part of that variation or malformation, whatever you want to call it, is that the first ribs can be missing as well. So your thoracic cavity actually ends up being larger than it should be. And I liken the two that I've looked at that have been missing first ribs, I liken it to when you hold a chicken and the head stays still, but the shoulders, the wings, they rotate around. And these horses, they just look like they're sort of swimming or paddling through the shoulders. There seems to be no stability. And, people are really reaching at the moment for, I suppose it's to find whether or not this is a problem or not, right? And I don't think you can blanket statement that, because people were panicking. I've heard from people who have put down ECVM horses as yearlings, 2-year-olds, because they're like, well, that horse is never going to have a career. But that's not true. And I know people who have got horses that have got ECVM that are actually competing at a very high level, and those horses are doing fine. And this is why it's complex.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that some horses are implicated through the nervous system, and they lack feeling in the front legs, and so that's why they can trip. But it is really complex, and it's not a one size fits all. And I think it becomes like if you've just got ECVM in the front and it's not a serious malformation, but you don't have any other variations throughout the body and the horse is good everywhere else, they probably can cope for a long time. Like I've dissected, 2 ECVM horses that were in their 20s, and people barely knew. It was just sort of like a consequential finding, right? But the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that I find problems wherever there's a junction in the body. So let's say from cervical onto thoracic, we find ECVM. From thoracic spine onto lumbar, we see the transitional ribs. Now, transitional ribs can present in a few different ways too. They can either have a facet joint at the top, or facet, depending where you're from in the world, onto thoracic spine, or they can have no facet joint and they present much like a transverse process in the lumbar, right? And so those in themselves can cause a problem. Like instead of all the ribs attaching through a cartilage connection onto the rest of the floating ribs, they actually direct themselves backwards and sort of stab the horse in the flanks. And when I'm dissecting them, I'll often find a ball of scar tissue around the end of that transitional rib.
Damn.
And it's crazy. And I'll never forget this one pony that I dissected, and she had a transitional rib only on one side. So it was a transitional rib that was, directed itself back into the flank, had a ball of scar tissue around it, and on the other side, it was a transverse process. So very, very different. Now, this pony made it all the way to Grand Prix show jumping, right?
Damn.
But she did her entire career cantering on one lead. One lead. But Grand Prix, right? And the rest of her body was in really good condition. Like she had no skeletal variations anywhere else in her body. She had a really well-placed lumbosacral junction, no ECVM, really nice clean spine, and she had no issues anywhere else. She did have some joint breakdown in the fetlock joints, but for a jumping pony, you would expect that, right? That's wear and tear. And then the next junction that becomes a problem is when you go on to lumbar to sacrum. So that's your lumbosacral junction, right? Now you've got two problems that can go on in the lumbosacral junction. You've got a sacralized lumbar, which means that your LS junction, your lumbosacral junction, is actually placed further back in the pelvis, and your L6 or L5, because it depends how many lumbar you've got. So Arabs originally had 5 lumbar, but somewhere along the line of outbreeding and crossing horses, we've ended up with 6 lumbar vertebrae. So you can never say in a sacralized lumbar whether or not it's L6 or L5. And I do have palpations to check that are pretty accurate. But so you've either got a sacralized lumbar, and what happens there is that your lumbosacral junction tends to be a false lumbosacral junction, because either L5 or L6 in their DSP, so your dorsal spinous processes, they get pulled into the pelvis. And basically what happens is your lumbosacral junction fuses, and then the junction between L5 and L6, or L4 and L5, depending how many lumbar we've got, becomes the new lumbosacral junction, right? But that's an intertransverse joint. And intertransverse joints are not meant to be a main center for movement. So you've got all these variations going on. And it was really interesting. I forget her name now, and this is going to annoy me. I think it was Lisa somebody. She died about 5 years ago, and she was doing really interesting research just quietly in the background. I think she's an American lady. And she had a test where you basically mark the landmark of the point of the hip and the pelvis. So tubercoxae, you draw a line over the top of the rump, right? And the lumbosacral junction should be within an inch of that line for optimum placement. And sometimes I find the distance from that line can be over 2 inches away. So there's really not been any studies that I've seen. You see little bits and pieces. Like there was a really interesting study done on lumbosacral placement and how that relates to performance, right? Because you would know, Lockie, with dressage horses and any horses, we want to get them to engage the pelvis, right? But imagine if the lumbosacral junction is placed too far back in the pelvis, which makes the flexibility of the pelvis compromised. So they actually cannot engage the pelvis to sit and push forward. And so this is where, for me, it becomes a real problem, because breeding for horses has been a runaway train for so long. We haven't had an understanding of this stuff. Everything has been allowed to live, and this is going to be a really hard conversation for a lot of people to swallow. But we are breeding with a lot of horses who don't have a performance history, and performance does matter. Because if the horse can't engage, if the horse can't jump, if the horse hasn't been a successful horse, then what is the yardstick that we're judging their ability on? They've got a nice nature. Okay, well, that's great. They've got a nice nature. But most people want to be riding their horse for soundness, right? And so a strong skeleton is important. Like, I'm long in the torso. I've got short legs and I'm long in the torso. And you want to see me run? I'm a terrible runner. Never been good at running. But I'm not skeletally put together to be a sprinter. I'm still useful. And I'm lucky I have other skills. But with horses, we do expect athletic ability from them, even just to be sound enough to carry a rider's weight, right?
Or sound enough to live in a pasture somewhere, because that's also the back end that I'm seeing from my position, is horses with these malformations, with these skeletal variations, the neck to back junction, the back to pelvis junction that you're talking about, with all of these bizarre Frankenstein bony growths where you've got a bone growing in a place where it shouldn't be growing, or a low spine bone pretending to be a backbone, and a backbone pretending to be a low spine bone. And it's just like Frankenstein stuff. You've got all these issues, and I'm meeting horses that are so far at the end of their rope that they're struggling to be sound in pasture. And then I'm hearing people say, well, I've got a horse with ECVM and they are happy and well at high-level classical work. And in the same breath, they describe how the horse is aggressive at feed time. And I go, are you not considering the correlation there? Because performance matters. I agree with you. But for some people, physical performance and physical output is all that matters. And so long as the horse is able to do everything that owner wants them to do under saddle, well, that means that malformation, that variation is okay in this animal's instance. But I also think that beyond performance, mental and emotional well-being matters also. We have to look at this multifaceted, multidimensional.
Well, yeah, and look, you can't focus on one area of the horse. Like, everything is
to the
interconnected.
detriment of the other. Right. Yes.
And the moment you start focusing on one issue, you just forget that the whole horse is joined together. And it's hard for us to even understand as bipeds because the gravitational forces and kinetic energy on our own spinal column is completely different. And even the makeup, like our vertebral disc, we've got an outer cartilage ring with a soft center, and horses don't have that. They just have a cartilage disc in between the vertebral body, right? But that's because the forces on the spine are completely different. And I explained to people that, like, you've got the front end of the horse, you've got the back end of the horse, and imagine the spine is like a swing bridge suspended between the two, right? And you've got the intense weight of the internal organs pulling down, and not just that, you've got gravity pulling down as well, and then we add our weight on top of that as well. Like, you really have to understand how to support a horse's body in order to keep them sound. And I suppose that's what I've tried to do with my work, is trying to get people to understand that they need to know this stuff if they want to keep a sound horse. And particularly if they don't have a horse with perfect conformation, which a lot of horses don't, let's face it, then you need to be extra super good at what you're doing. And I don't know, I just think that horses don't measure their life in the amount of days that they have. It's about the quality, and I think it's so difficult for people to think about all this stuff in balance and not get carried away, or not put too much emotion onto the horse. Like, there's a practicality, right, with horses, and they're so reliant on us. And so it's really difficult to keep these discussions fully balanced, because so many people...
I don't think it's possible to have a fully balanced discussion here. So this is how I imagine the solution for us as a community might be. Yeah. I could be wildly wrong. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to look for the perfect balanced voice through the din, we need to sit at a table and give space for all of the voices. The fearful voices, the angry voices, the strident voices, the critical voices, the evil voices, the kind voices, the unqualified voices, the qualified voices, the abstract voice. We need everyone to be able to sit down and plainly speak from their voice, and have everyone else around them with enough self-confidence in themselves as horse people to listen to a voice you don't like or prefer, and to listen to the voice you don't like or prefer, and take in the information. Instead of everyone trying to tone police each other, let people have their voices, because we're kind of missing the point. This industry reform is not going to be done if everyone's saying, "Oh, you upset my feelings." Don't care. I'm trying to speak about the horse's feelings. Don't care. Why are you so interested about your feelings? Let people speak. And that also includes someone else saying to you, "I don't like your tone." It includes that. I'll admit that. I'll concede that. You're allowed to say, "Hey, I would like us all to find a better way to speak about this." Sure. But if no one's speaking about it, the first step involves moving forward. Same with a horse. What's the first thing? Move forward. Not move forward with quality, not move forward with collection. Just, can they lift the feet off the ground and start taking steps, Yeah. And that's what I see you doing. You're lifting your feet off the ground and you're taking steps. Maybe we're going to collect this later. Maybe it's going to round up and get smooth later. And you are, you're doing all of that now because you're rolling forwards. But the people who try to tell others to stop speaking, and then in the same breath speak about the problems in the industry and how they want change and how they're working for change, it is so counterproductive in my view.
Yeah, look, scientific study has been around for a long time. And, from my perspective, I suppose the reason that I've done things the way that I've done them is because I believe in change from the bottom up. If you really want to get things moving in the horse world, I don't think it's that difficult to actually make change. You have to be able to break down the problems in a way that people can comprehend. They need to understand why they need to know, and they also need to be aware of the things that they don't know. And that's what a lot of people get out of looking at my work, is they go, "Oh my God, I had no idea." And I get a lot of experienced horse people come to me for advice and help. And they're flabbergasted that they don't know. And they're like, why isn't this information somewhere? And so I'm
How
actually
could they
writing
have known? How could they?
Well, it's been gatekept for so long. And that
Right.
is really the restriction of the scientific method, is like, if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. And I read a lot. I'm a big reader, right? And there are so many things in science that we don't understand. So like a couple of things like terminal lucidity, and hospice nurses have been talking about this for hundreds of years. So we're talking about people who are bedridden, can't toilet themselves, and an hour before they pass over, they become completely lucid. And the nurses get on the phone and they call the family and they say, you need to get here. Auntie Linda has become completely lucid. And so the family turn up, and she's, talking to them about things that she hasn't been able to converse about for 10 years sometimes. And the family are, like, they can't believe it. This person is back with me. And then they just die. They pass over. And science can't explain that. But it's almost like our consciousness is not actually in our brain. It's like the only analogy I can give is like the iCloud, right?
Right.
Is that our consciousness is actually somewhere else, and we're uploading and downloading from that platform all the time. And so consciousness is actually somewhere else. Like these doctors have done brain scans of these people, and their brain is non-functional, and then they become completely lucid. So there's this book called Threshold, and if you're interested, I recommend everybody read it, because it's a fascinating read, and it documents from hundreds of years ago these cases, and it is absolutely amazing. And then also, people who have had transplants and they wake up with the memories of the donor. So like, your memories are stored in your soft tissues. Like that stuff blows my mind, but science can't explain that stuff. And like, we need to remember that 120 years ago, we were lobotomizing women for being hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So everything is in balance. Like, yes, science is important, and it's definitely a step in the right direction, but it's not the only way.
No,
it's really not. And it doesn't allow for, exploration and new ideas and all of this kind of stuff. And the nice thing about dissection is people can argue with me until they're blue in the face, but you come and look at my skeleton collection and people are blown away by the things that can go on in a horse's body. So yeah, again,
how many skeletons do you have in your collection now?
Oh gosh, honestly, Lockie, I'm overwhelmed because I've got so many bones that I haven't even processed yet. So most of the horses' bodies now I compost.
Right.
So I compost them in big containers, which actually that's becoming a thing with humans too now, composting human bodies, because it's the most sort of eco-friendly way to do it. So yeah, I have at the moment probably 20 skeletons here, all composted, ready to be articulated. And I would love to start putting all the skeletons together, but it is so time consuming.
You need an army of work. You need an army of people doing that kind of work.
That was the whole point of building the research facility that we've fundraised for here, which we've taken a lot of crap for. But
tell us about that. I saw that you have a brick and mortar thing that's gone up. Tell us about that.
Yeah. My friend Esme, who's been a bodyworker for a long time and has a nutritional feed company, Main Equine, she basically came to me one day, because before this I was just doing these dissections, in a paddock, and it's hard work, it's manual labor, you're out in the elements, and it's just exhausting. It's exhausting because it's physically and emotionally exhausting, right? Because what you're seeing, you can't help but have an emotional experience. So, like, I'm not a robot.
You're chopping up horses in a paddock. I mean, and you're a horse lover and a horse owner and a breeder and a mum, It's a big deal.
Yeah, no, it is a big deal. And I think that's something that people have kind of given me a bit of crap for. And it's like I do have to somewhat compartmentalize away from it, or like I couldn't cope with the work.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, it's I lost my train of thought there.
Well, you've established a research center because you were out in a paddock.
Anyway, Esme came to me one day and she said, look, Becks, I love what you're doing. I want to be part of it. I want to support the work. I feel like the work that you're doing is going to be life-changing for a lot of people and horses. And she said, me and my partner would love to build you a facility on the property. And I was like,
what?
I was taken aback. I was just blown away. Like it really took me off yeah, I was sort of like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And so then we got a team of people together to basically write contracts. We needed to get in touch with the right authorities and check that we were legally able to do this stuff, because there are legalities around it. But look, the legalities really is that I'm not a vet. I can't diagnose a live horse, and I never do. And once the horse is been humanely euthanized, which there are three main options for that: vet put down either by lethal dose of barbiturates, or the horse can be captive bolt gunned, or put down with gunshot. So those are really your three options. And as long as those are done by professionals who know what they're doing, then once the horse has been euthanized, the legalities stop. So there are no laws to protect dead animals, which makes sense, right? Why would there be? Because once the horse is mainly dispatched, all protections for that animal, they cease. And then it turns over to being disposal of toxic waste. Exactly.
Right.
Disposal of the meat. And if the horse is put down with gunshot, then we do try and repurpose the meat. I normally donate it to people with dogs. And so, yeah, that's one part of it. It's a pain in the ass if the horse is put down with barb, because all of that meat is toxic waste, and there's a whole process. I really don't enjoy doing that. It's a lot more work for me. But I also have to be empathetic to the owners, and I really just am guided by what the owners want. And sometimes there's situations where owners have got hold of me and they're like, look, I'd like a dissection on a specific area done on my property. And then I advise them to get the digger in, dig a hole, have the horse put down by a vet or whatever means they'd like to. And I turn up at the property, do the dissection, and then the horse is buried on the property. So I'm pretty flexible like that, because I understand the emotional burden that goes along with having to make this decision for a very loved animal. And so I really just try and do whatever works for the owner, because once the horse has been put down, it really switches into like making sure that the person is okay, right? And so there's a lot of elements to this, but the research facility has been an absolute game changer, because it's set up for this work. So, like everything is set up for easy cleaning, for easy handling of the horse. We've got a professional shooter that comes to the facility that I trust. He does it for a job. And so we really tried to tick all the boxes and to offer a service so that it was as stress-free as possible, not only for the horse, but for the humans too. And people really do get peace of mind. And, like there's been a bit of grief recently where people have been like, oh, but how can you guarantee what you're seeing? Look, I work with vets. I've got a team of vets that I will run stuff past. And yes, there is limitations to that. They're only seeing photos and videos. They're not there in the flesh. But look, joint changes are joint changes. You'd have to be a blimmin' idiot to not be able to see joint changes. Do you know what I mean? Like there's some things that just they stick out and you can't not see them once you know what they look like. But that's another thing too, is like I will protect my vets that I work with to the grave. No one will ever get names from me of the people that I work with. And I say that to the vets that come on the dissections, because they're often very nervous about coming on my dissections. I'm not going to roll them out as the golden goose. I don't give a crap. To me, they're just people. They're people with an education. And so I actually take the time to message the vets before they come on the dissections and just say, you have my absolute discretion. I'll never mention your name. I realize it could be your livelihood that's at risk here. And so, somebody actually pushed me for it last week, and I said, I don't care. You can call me whatever you want, but you'll never get the names of the vets that I work with. And I really only run things past them if I haven't seen it so much that I'm confident in saying, yes, that's what it is. But, like we're not running pathology or histology on a lot of the stuff that we're seeing. So we're still not getting the full view, right? Because we can't afford to do those things. So, if I see a problem, let's say cirrhosis in the liver, right? I'm not sending a sample of that liver away for histology and pathology because it costs. And when horses come to me, I've had horses that have had $15,000 spent on them at vets and still don't have the answers. Do you know what I mean? I've really struggled to actually offer my service at a charge. And, I still do dissections for people for free if I think that it's that there'll be a learning in it for me, and the people can't afford to have a dissection done. Like it's really hard. I am often turning up to pick up horses from people's property where the owners are just beside themselves, and that part's really hard. But yeah, I feel like I'm also giving the horses a voice, and that their lives are not lost in vain, and then also peace of mind for the owners, because there's nothing worse than putting a horse down and questioning for the rest of your life whether or not you made the right call. Like it's a life, right? Like nobody's doing this happily or easily.
It's
under duress.
It's necessary and it's needed, and it's not everyone's work, but God damn it, thank God someone's doing it, in New Zealand at least. And you're traveling as well. I saw that you were in Ireland to do some dissections. Is that right?
Yes, I've been to Ireland 3 times now. 3 times, 2 times. Oh God, I lose count. 3 times, 2 times. I don't know. My life has become chaotic. But I'm back in Scotland and the UK in November. And I'm in Australia in a couple of months' time. I've got 2 dissections happening in Australia and Sydney. Yeah, look, it's not glamorous work. It's disgusting. It's dirty. I come home stinking. Like it's to do a full dissection in a day with myself and 3 other people. Like it's a lot of work. And I'm incredibly grateful to the people who donated to get the facility built. Like it was certainly not a cheap exercise to do, but it's somewhere out of the weather that we can be and come together. And what's been really amazing for me is building my wee team and community around me to do the work. And I mean, Canterbury is a really small place, and I've certainly had my fair share of backlash within the community in Canterbury. Excuse me. And so that part's been disheartening. But what I've really loved is bringing together a team of people around the work that we're doing, and just the learning and the knowledge that you're able to share with people. And I quite often will come across like a young body worker who'll say to me, like, I just love what you're doing. I'd love to be able to come, but I can't afford to do a dissection. And I'd be like, oh, we've got one in 2 weeks. Just come along. I'm not going to charge you, just because I want people to see this stuff, because it is life-changing. Just to see how much is packed into the abdominal cavity, to see what nerves look like, and, their elasticity, like to see the nuchal ligament and how heavy the head is, there's just, it's just wonderment, like I've been doing this for coming up 5 years now, and I'm still blown away, at the beauty of the body. Yeah, and I just love being able to share it with people. It's such an experience to bring people together. And look, the weirdness of it is not lost on me. But, how can you really understand something if you don't understand it from that sort of level?
Yeah.
It's kind of how I feel. And that's how people come away from the dissections. It's life-changing, honestly. Like I've had people burst into tears because I'm just completely overwhelmed by how much there is to learn,
I know something about that also. I've had some people come back from dissections and report to me, how can I ever ride a horse again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Having seen damage correlated to use and the potential, not guaranteed, the potential pain that use incurred damage could result for the horse. A lot of people watch these dissections and they are changed, and some of that change is really jarring. They'll sit on a horse and have an existential crisis just for sitting there. They're like, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I? Because they now see beyond the skin. They now see beyond the postures. They see beyond the test. They see beyond the training and the tack. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think any horse has been trained or handled better because of ignorance.
Yeah.
I think that can only improve things. But how do you impart information to people who find it jarring, confronting, and life-altering in the way that it's not immediately positive for them mentally.
Yeah, look, sometimes I get messages from people weeks, sometimes months after a dissection where they're just digesting it. And everybody processes the information differently, right? But it is really confronting. And I think everybody's having their own experience of the dissection and brings their own history, horses' stories, etc., etc. And look, there's never really an easy way to answer that question. I try and just have conversations with people, and I hope that people are open enough to have those conversations with me on a dissection so that we can have a balanced conversation about it. It's really difficult. There's no easy answer to that, but I do try and balance the conversation with people because, we are looking at horses on dissections that have been donated to us because they have problems, and people are looking for answers. So, yeah, it's not straightforward.
It's not straightforward to answer. You almost need an aftercare person because that's like you've got enough on your plate,
So when I do a dissection, one of the first things I do before the dissection is open up a group chat.
Perfect.
And the reason I do that is because sometimes people ask me questions through the dissection. I've got a massive library on, my phone. And so there'll be questions and I'll say, add it to the group chat later. And then I'll add the applicable information. So I'll either pull videos off of my Patreon library and add them into the group chat and be like, here's it explained, because we're not going to see every variation or, problem in that one dissection horse, right? So the group chats are really important, and people will contact me through the group chat situation, sometimes years, months, whatever later, and just share with the group because you've gone through an experience with a whole group of people, right, who understand what you're going through. And so it's really cool to see even just the support networks that pop up on the group chats afterwards. And it feels like a community.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the kind of dynamic that I've actively tried to encourage, because I just want to see people not cut each other down. And like you said earlier, if we all worked together and brought together our collective knowledge without the ego, without our own
policing.
Yeah, 100%. I think people would actually realize that we're all on the same page, and you don't need to be butting heads. That's not what's going to get horses ahead. In fact, if we don't come together as a community, we're going to have decisions made for us by people who don't understand horses and the love that we have for the animal. I don't think anybody walks outside, even people who are quite rough with the horses. I don't think that they walk outside in the morning and think I'm going to go mess some horses up today. I think they genuinely are quite convinced that what they're doing is the right method, and they potentially don't even know that there are other ways. People just get stuck in their own feedback loop, don't they? I see stuff online all the time that I think that doesn't align with me, but that's where that person is in their journey, and you can't shake people out of that stuff. You'll never see me comment on somebody's post that I don't like what they're doing with their horse and say, abuse, you're abusing your horse, because that's not the stage of the journey that they're at, and look.
Let's take a break. So I had a really lovely email recently, super respectful and smart email that asked a really good question. Lockie, is there any space on your podcast or in your teachings to have conversations that reach out to the competitive riding community? Could you be a bridge for people who ride sport horses and compete? A bridge for those people who would like to change but do not know how and often feel intimidated by the quote-unquote horse-first community? It's a great question. I think that's a great question that's worthy of some reflection on my behalf. And this would be a good time to mention to any horse person who would like to try emotional horsemanship but doesn't know where to start or doesn't want to start their riding or their training from the very beginning again, that I have prepared a program designed exactly for you, for this person. Homecoming 2.0 is the name of this course, and it is the most detailed and challenging course I've ever created so far. And I created it together with my team, Michelle Knapp and Christy Foley, who have been on this podcast. We focused on the horse person who needed a bridge to a different way of being with horses, a bridge that felt secure to them, to begin exploring some of their horses' questions. Questions such as, does my horse enjoy riding? How important is straightness? How symmetrical should my horse's flexions be? How to transition from one riding and training style into another without confusing my horse. We taught the students in Homecoming 2.0 some actionable elements that you can take home to interpret individually in this course. And you can sign up for this course exclusively through the link provided in this podcast episode below. I've even put in a little discount on the podcast episode link. So click the link in the show notes of this podcast to see some free previews and to get a discount access to Homecoming 2.0. It's kind of a groundbreaking collection of materials, and all students get lifetime access to it. And with that, let's return to my conversation with Becks Nairns.
Shake people out of that stuff. You'll never see me comment on somebody's post that I don't like what they're doing with their horse and say, abuse, you're abusing your horse, because that's not the stage of the journey that they're at, and look, they might never get there, but I can't control all that stuff. I've got enough problems just dealing with the stuff I'm dealing with in my own backyard. So it's really difficult. You've got to be very considered and controlled with even your emotional output, right?
I feel very attacked right now. No, one of the things that I used to do when I felt less empowered.
Yeah. Look, everybody goes through it.
Right.
You're not alone.
When I felt less empowered but still informed and passionate, I used to go onto other people's business platforms and place a comment that questioned and pushed back. And then was confused when they didn't enjoy that. And then very quickly I learned that's not the thing to do. If you've got something to say, make your own place to say it and offer solutions. So if I see something that's jarring to me, I take that information, take that feeling and do something proactive with it. I'll go over to my own platform and talk about the issues. I won't talk about the individuals. And if individuals say, oh, I feel like you're insinuating me, I say, well, if the shoe fits.
Yeah, 100%. And that's your platform. That's a positive thing to do. And you use what you saw as inspiration. I've done the same thing, through my platform, because I think it's about just starting discussions as well. And then sometimes, those people, they might feel attacked in the beginning, but they might also read your post and read all the comments and think like, And so I call it planting the seed. And we have a lot of these conversations on my dissections, is like you plant the seed of knowledge. And if somebody chooses to water it that day or 6 months down the track or a year down the track, they've had the idea planted in their mind, right? And look, the ego might not be ready to accept that there is a different way to do things or a better way to do things, but that's not your job.
Right.
You can get so weighed down by all the crap that you see on Facebook. Like I saw a post yesterday where a woman was like, I have to lunge my horse for an hour before I can ride it. And I'm just like, my heart sinks for those people and for the horse.
I had we had a guest on the podcast, Felicity Davies, who described practices where she heard where horses were lunged, I think, for 7 hours prior to a competition with earplugs in. Overnight lunging. 3 hours for sure. But then, correct me if I'm wrong, but she was one of the first guests I had on the podcast, and she very openly and bravely told the story from the Australian competition scene when she was a kid. Horses who were earplugged and then lunged for overnight prior to a competition to, quote, take the fizz out. And I had to stop her and say, did you just say what you said? Clarify. Yes, I did say that. I'm like, please explain it to me, because I'm losing my open mind.
Yeah. Look, a horse that I took on, he's actually one of the first horses I dissected, a 13-year-old Swedish warm blood. And the owner, very nonchalant, lovely lady, don't get me wrong, lovely lady,
right.
very openly and happily and nonchalantly just said, oh yeah, well, I used to lunge him for 2.5 hours or ride him for 2.5 hours before I'd do a test. And, she told me about doing a 3-day tournament, and she did that every day for 3 days. And and on the third day, the steward noticed her and asked her to hop off her horse, and she was shocked by that. And I just remember sitting there going like, oh my God, like, and I just remember thinking, I don't think I can help this horse. Like, this is trauma for the horse on a different level. Do you know what I mean?
But I also wonder where you were speaking about community, right? And your aftercare is very based in the community around the dissections, which I love. I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to create community around the movement, yes, and around ways of being with horses. I think this individual who's doing that to horses, where is their community around them that's taking them by the elbow and saying, babe, what are you doing? It's like when you watch the X Factor, or, Australia's Got Talent, America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent, and someone comes in and they say, I'm the next Celine Dion, and then they open their mouth and everyone's wondering where this is coming from and how this person got into that situation. And I'm not critical of that individual. I'm critical of their family and friends who encouraged this, and put the person in that situation where they're embarrassed and they're potentially doing harm to themselves and others with horses. I think that's one of the issues. It's this rugged individualism that we've all had shoved down our throat, and we're supposed to like do it alone and succeed on our own and make it happen. And what we're supposed to be doing is building community. That doesn't mean you have to be friends with everyone, but we're supposed to be building community.
No, yeah. And it's important to understand that you don't have to be liked by everybody as well. But that look, on the online space, it's really difficult. But I don't know what the answer is, because I suppose that's what the governing bodies are meant to be for, right? But I feel like with horses, there's been a real cognitive dissonance where there's been so little understood about the physiology of horses, and we understand so little about the brain body connection, and then everybody sort of to an extent anthropomorphizes, so puts human feelings onto the animals. And I don't know, like, there's only so much I think we can understand from a prey predator relationship anyway. And I do think like the nervous system is wired completely different between horses and humans. So I think it's really tricky, and I think until science kind of catches up. Like, I haven't seen any studies where we've even strapped on like an ECG machine to a horse's brain to even know what parts of the brain light up under what stimulation. And I mean, maybe that's a Pandora's box that nobody wants to open, right? Because
there's been similar studies done on other animals, but not on horses.
Map the horse's brain and thought like, okay, well, this is the part of the brain that lights up when they eat a carrot, for example, and then you ride them and that part of the brain doesn't light up. Well, then that raises an ethical question, right? And like, are we ready to take that leap? I probably don't think so. And so, you either agree to the fact that a lot of, a horse's ridden life is subjugation. I mean, these are massive questions to ask. And, I have these things whirling around in my head all the time.
Well, those questions that you just alluded to the last minute or so, those ones are really my wheelhouse. And that's what I've decided to focus all of my energies on. I don't have time to dissect horses, nor is it going to be my wheelhouse. I don't have time to be breeding horses, nor is it really going to be my wheelhouse. I might dabble in the future, but my wheelhouse is really trying to understand all of that stuff at a detailed level. And there is some good research coming out lately that's quite exciting, but it is a very difficult subject.
It is very loaded.
Very loaded, but it's supposed to be loaded. And we have to put ourselves on the side and really think about the horses in order to go cleanly through it. And that's very similar to what you do with your work. You put yourself on the side so you can go cleanly through the experience of understanding what their bodies have to tell us. I do want to know, for my own interest, what malformations or variations, pathologies, are you seeing in most of the horses you're dissecting that you kind of expect it. You go in to open up a joint, you're like, well, there it is, just as I thought. What kind of things are you seeing that are super common?
I mean, I've stopped dissecting a lot of racehorses unless I think there's something really interesting going on, because
they're all the same.
Yeah, look,
What do
people
you
are not
see?
going to.
What
People
do
are
you see?
not going to.
What do you see in these thoroughbreds and standardbreds? What are you seeing?
I've never looked at a racehorse that doesn't have either current or old synovitis. So new synovitis looks very vascular. They look like tiny little feathers of veins, and that is really inflammation in the synovium.
And what is synovium, so that people understand?
So it's okay. So you've got two joints that come. Let's pretend this is a fetlock joint. Okay,
Two
right?
bones coming together.
You've got the labrum that covers the joint, right? Which is technically just, let's call it a joint capsule.
A sock.
So the joint capsule is what protects the joint itself and houses and keeps the synovial fluid inside of the joint.
And the synovial fluid is the lubrication fluid that's inside a joint, allows a joint to move.
Correct. And so it's a very big subject, but basically, okay, so 3 years ago, I dissected two foals that had traumatic births, right? And I was absolutely shocked to find that those foals they had every single joint full of synovitis. And so that alluded to the fact that synovitis and joint inflammation is very closely tied to cortisol release from the brain from a stress event. So if you think about it this way, when the foal has a prolonged birth and becomes traumatic, the mare's heart rate raises, the foal's heart rate raises, and all of a sudden the body starts to panic. Like if you've ever experienced a panic attack and you know how consuming and overwhelming that is, I feel that is what's happening to the foals when they become stuck inside the mare, or there's a problem, or the birth's going on too long. And that was shocking in itself to me, to see how quickly joints could break down like that. Now that's a bold statement to make, because I've only looked at two foals, and that's my body of work.
It is 2 for 2.
It's 2 for 2, but I met this lady, and it's really interesting how you meet these people sort of serendipitously at the right time, right? When I dissected those two foals, I met a woman who'd done 30,000 lamb dissections, and she was a real game changer within the sheep industry. And she was saying that prolonged births causes joint inflammation, and those lambs are at a higher risk. It was something crazy, like 80 or 90% risk of getting joint ill. And joint ill is basically like an infection in the joints. And they weren't really understanding why these lambs were dying from joint infections. And so she actually changed the lambing protocols about prolonged birth, and that if the lambs had been through a traumatic birthing process, that it was actually better to put them down than try and give them antibiotics and nurse them through, because those are essentially sick animals that shouldn't be bred from or go into the food chain or whatever. So she did 30,000 lamb dissections, right? And so I was talking to her, and I explained that I'd seen in these two foals, this joint inflammation. I showed her pictures. She's like, yeah, that's exactly what it looks like in the lambs. But nobody's doing dissections on foals at a large rate that have been through traumatic birthing experiences to know. And in the thoroughbred industry, these foals are kept alive at all costs. The mares don't even have to push the foals out. They're dragged out by people who are micromanaging every single aspect of the horses' lives. And so I'm seeing in every single racehorse synovitis in the fetlocks at least, and then probably on a lower rate in the knees, but I see a lot of it in the knees as well. And so synovitis, when it's highly vascularized and in its acute phase, it's very red and angry looking. And then as time goes by and it stops being acute, the inflammation goes down and it turns into a thick sheet of scar tissue. And that is what starts rubbing on the margin of the joint and then breaking down the cartilage. And then that's where the osseous changes happen. So, the actual bone starts remodeling. But, there's other things too. So like the actual synovial fluid will change its chemical makeup. So it becomes higher in protein and leukocytes, and that changes the viscosity of the actual synovial fluid. So the synovial fluid basically goes from being a nice, liquid lubricating substance to actually having sort of like, when you look at it under the microscope, fine crystals in it. And so that's being abrasive in the joint itself as well. So then you have other things that can actually happen in the cartilage. So I see a lot of breakdown in cartilage that's actually separate from the margin of the joint being broken down by the new or old synovitis. But I have not to date, and please keep in mind that I'm dissecting dysfunctional horses, I've not to date seen any racehorses without synovitis in at least the fetlock joints across all 4 legs. Now, synovitis in humans we know is really, really painful. And so if you've got a horse that's got synovitis across all 4 legs, well, which one's the lame one? Because if that's all 4 of the pillars and they have to stand on their legs, I often see these horses, it comes out in behavioural issues, that they are so sore in all 4 of their joints and unable to display a lameness, so it comes out in aggressive behaviour. I know my tolerance for bullshit is much lower if I've got a headache. I'm dealing with a comfort. So, these are massive questions. So I'd love to see a study done on racehorses about how prolific synovitis is across, the racehorses, and then that will raise the question of whether or not it is ethical to put the horse's body under that much stress and pressure. That
just in case I have collected any listener who is a warm audience towards the racing industry, just in case I have collected someone who's a warm audience towards the racing industry, could you explain, in your opinion only, just your opinion, we're not stating maybe universal fact, but in your opinion, Becks, why don't you touch those racehorses anymore? Because you've seen the prevalence, you've seen the repetitive joint synovial issues. Why? What's causing these issues in those racehorses?
I think it's high stress. I think that they are athletes, and I think that we're pushing their bodies on a regular basis beyond the capacity. And we see evidence of that in the fact that 90% of racehorses have had a lung bleed. So you've pushed 90% of the racehorses to the point where their lungs, where the vascular system have been pushed past the point of, what's the word?
Capacity.
Correct. Thank you. Capacity. And something actually bursts and you get a bleed. And that's a problem for me. So, if we're pushing the horse to the point where something bursts in their lung and they get a bleed, pulmonary bleed, I think the joint problems are really secondary to that, and that it's the stress and the workload of being a racehorse, and having your body pushed to that point on a consistent basis. I don't know. I just, for me, I think one of the worst things that happen to racehorses is Wolff's Law. And if you're not familiar with Wolff's Law, that basically just states that the bone remodels to the workload that it's under. And that is true, but that's only one part of the equation, right? Like, yes, bone matrix does remodel to the job that it's and the load that it's under. But that forgets about all the other soft tissues that have to go on around it. Like, bones do remodel. They're amazing. Like, this is why my interest is mainly in the skeleton, because bone is amazing. And the way that the bone can, have its own osseous growth, it can get out of control really quickly, which you can see very clearly in kissing spine and any kissing spine x-rays. But yeah, look, I stopped looking at racehorses because once you've seen that joint breakdown en masse, it's sort of like it just becomes a bit soul destroying, and there's nothing more particularly interesting in those horses for me to see. And I would really like to see a study done. Like, synovitis is the easiest thing to diagnose, right? But I hardly ever hear of it diagnosed locally. Everybody gets x-rays, and synovitis is the precursor to arthritis, and it's incredibly painful for the horse. And you can just ultrasound it.
Right. I've got a horse with arthritis at home, 2 horses with arthritis at home, and had it before they came to me. And in conversation with previous owners, they said, oh, well, we never saw anything on x-rays. And then my reply was something to the effect of, well, there would have been changes in soundness and compensation in the horse's movement long before you see anything on x-rays. That process takes years. Arthritis doesn't appear overnight. It's a long cascading process where it's a lot of soft tissue change first for many, many years. And you'll see it as maybe they're a little short-strided behind. Maybe they're reluctant to come through in the back. Maybe they're a little stiff getting going on a Tuesday morning. Little niggling things that is so easy for good quality horse people to kind of explain away as something that requires their technique, rather than sort of stepping backwards and yielding to the presence of resistance in the horse and actually listening to their bodies as part of the training. This is so hard to do. I mean, yesterday I rode this horse I'm speaking about at home and in equipment that I don't like. So a bit, I don't love bits, but I still have them and use them. There's nothing else that can work on the tongue, hyoid ventral fascia. Nothing else can access that part of the horse's body. And a lot of people use bits, so it behooves me to understand their use. So I filmed myself doing it, and then I got back on this computer and I watched my ride frame by fucking frame and then in reverse, and paused at any frame where I saw an issue, even small, and forced myself to peel the skin off my eyes and look at it like almost horrible to myself, like how people would take a dog and put their nose in their poo if they pooed in the house, like doing that to myself to really say, not to be hard on myself, but to say, look at the issue. Were you aware of this when you were riding? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, can I get aware of it tomorrow morning, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's what I think it's kind of going to take for some of these practices to shift, you know?
Yeah, but look, you're self-aware and self-critical.
Sometimes.
And you're in a growth mindset. And so, like, I always say to people, you know, like, the horses will hold up the mirror to us, right? And horsemanship is a journey inwards. And how many people are not willing to even look at their own behavior? And
Let me say this. In my opinion, I understand what you're saying and the intentions are good, that horsemanship is a journey inwards. I think that's a problem. Horsemanship should be a journey to the horse. It should be a journey to the horse.
Yeah, totally. But if you're not self-reflective about, like, disconnected from their own body.
Right. So a lot of people use horsemanship as a journey inwards, ... self-help modality, ... horses my therapist, ... horses help me be a better human, and they've stopped innovating practices. That's kind of where it goes.
You know, and I think that's a problem in itself, because a lot of people are looking at the horse as the therapy modality.
Hello.
And you know, like I struggle with that stuff too. And it's really why I kind of stepped away from doing a lot of the training based stuff that I was doing with people, because it's just super difficult. It's tough.
It's tough to navigate. You have to get out of your own way. There's a journey inwards as a side effect, as a journey to the horse. You journey inwards so that you can journey back to the horse. You don't use the horse so that you journey inwards and stay there. You're supposed to journey to the horse.
That's an important distinction. I'm glad you pointed that out, because it is very true. But you've got to,
just my opinion.
No, but you're right, because you're right, because it's, you know, it's just, look, the horse has to wear so much for us. And I always say to people, we're always learning at the expense of the horse. And that's a shit thing to say, but it's the truth of it. I think, you know, like, I've had horses in my journey that have had to suffer through me. Like, you know, my stallion's a prime example, and that's why I put up that video. And I try and be as jovial as I can, because I think, like, I don't want to be presenting myself on social media like, you know, my shit doesn't stink, because I've had my own journey. And so, you know, like, I gave up on that horse twice. And the first time I, like, 100% put all the burden on the horse, like, well, the horse is broken. He's got a dropped hip. He can't do this. He can't do that. And then I sort of went away and thought about it, and I didn't ride him for like 6 months. And then, you know, went away for this, came back at it the second time, had another go, got further, definitely. And I worked on the relationship piece, and we conquered that part, the relationship piece. but then it fell apart again, and I had to rethink the whole situation, turned him out for another 6 months, and then I was like, right, it's me. I'm the problem. Like, I've got to learn a completely different way to ride this horse because he can't sustain, in his body. But it was really interesting to watch how his body changed between those periods of,
yes.
but either making the horse stronger or weaker by the work that you're doing. And a lot of people get stuck in this loop where they just think like, well, I'll ride it harder and I'll push it harder and I'll, sometimes that's not the answer. Sometimes doing less is more. But
that's why I think this interruptive mechanism is so important. People stuck in loops, good loops, bad loops, average loops, whatever we're stuck in needs to be interrupted. Someone's got to interrupt it. Someone's got to. And there are many different ways to interrupt. You can interrupt gently. You can interrupt brashly. There's many different, but you've got to interrupt. You've got to get off the fence on an issue eventually,
Yeah.
Because we're getting to a point with horses' bodies and this runaway freight train breeding, line breeding, where inaction is no longer going to help us or help the horses. And it's not going to get better anytime soon. And so people are going to find themselves in situations where, yes, nuance, yes, gray area, but have you made a firm decision one side or the other first before you explore nuance? Because exploring nuance on both sides of the picture means you actually haven't decided where you stand. And if you haven't decided where you're standing on it, then you're actually not taking any action at all. You're just talking about action and then taking none, And so we've got to start making these decisions about where we stand. That's why I respect you so much. And like every single time I've reached out to you and say, hey, Becks, have you got a horse with this kind of issue? I'm teaching something and I need some examples of joints like X. You went, yeah, no problem. What are you going to use them for? I'm like, privately in a group, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, fine, send. And you've shared videos with me and clips and information very freely, very generously. This is all interruptive mechanisms that interrupt my ignorance with your information. Bring it on. And I will solicit that. From people.
I know a lot of my stuff is behind a paywall, and the reason for that is like
you have to eat.
I have to eat. I've got 3 children and horses.
You have to eat. Your horses deserve hay. It's called being a professional. I mean, unless you are a registered charity with the benefits of a charity, you deserve to make a living. I mean, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Equestrian professionals treating their businesses like charities and then wondering why they're on the breadline. That's a whole other can of worms that needs to be undone. And the communities that expect that of them, frankly.
But I never, like if somebody genuinely reaches out to me and says, XYZ problem, like I'll pull 3 videos off my Patreon and just send them to them. Like that's not getting off my nose. Or like when I was at Equitana, like I went to all the talks, and if I saw something that I could add to the situation, I just went up to the professional afterwards and said like, would you like some pictures of compromised lungs? And one lady was selling a herbal supplement for asthmatic horses, and I said, well, actually, I've got some really good pictures of asthmatic lungs, and she was like, oh my god, like.
Thanks.
You're just going to me? And I was like, yeah, because I'll be really honest with you, Lockie. I'm not going to do this work forever. I think I've probably got another 5 years in my tank, and then I'll move on. And so my aim is to put enough of a body of work out. And after that 5 years, I'll probably release all of the videos off my Patreon onto some kind of free platform and be like, that's my gift. That's my gift. Equestrianism. Yeah. Like that. It's out there now. Love it, hate it, don't give a shit. I'm moving on to something else now because I don't think I can sustain the work that I'm doing forever. It's all consuming. And I probably average about 5 messages every day from someone around the planet who wants help. It's too much. I can't do it. I've tried a couple of times to like, there's a couple of people in New Zealand where I've been like, please, like, help me do the work, and they sort of do a couple of dissections and then they realize like how consuming it is, how physical it is, how mentally consuming it is, the amount of reading that I have to do to go alongside the work that I'm doing, because it's not good enough to just be chopping up horses. You have to know what you're looking at. And so, yeah, it's really challenging. There's so many facets. And if you're on my Patreon, like I try and share this stuff with everybody. So it's people understand the stuff that goes along with it, because it's not simple. None of it's simple. But yeah.
No, it's not
Yeah.
simple. And unfortunately, we've been sold this stylized vision of life through shopping channels. 3 easy payments of $19.99. Buy this knife and chopping tomatoes is easier forevermore. And we kind of expect the same thing out of horses in our learning about horses, but it just doesn't work that way. They are a complex animal. Biology is complex, living is complex, and so are we. And we need to get better with complexity. We have to shift that relationship. And just on like the sustainability piece, I finished my work year in 2024 on the 15th of December, and then I disappeared for about almost 2 months. I had to.
Yeah.
I had to. I just needed to take a breath.
Yeah, you got to look after yourself.
So grateful to be working in this economy with horses, to be working at all, being a ranting, raving lunatic in some people's eyes and a genius and an assistance in other people's eyes. I'm grateful to be working, and I'm grateful to be able to take care of myself and my horses. And I realize not only do I have to employ people now, I have a full-time administrator because I have too many emails than I can actually get to. So she has to deal with all of that, and she's better at it than me. And I have to find coaches that can help me reach the people that need the help, because apparently there is an everlasting funnel of people who've been chewed up and spat out by the industry the same way the horses have. And some of the stories I'm getting from people about their experiences with other professionals are egregious. And I don't blame those professionals, because I understand now that sometimes it sucks, this work. And when it really sucks and it's your living and you love it, that's a very confusing place for a working person to be. And sometimes people lose control of themselves in that instance, and they wouldn't be the first or the last, and they're not bad people for doing it, generally speaking. But I took a break because I thought, okay, it's unsustainable. How do I make this sustainable? How do I do that? Stay tuned, figuring it out.
Work in progress.
But I so appreciate you having the cognizance that 5 years and I'm moving on. And if I was in another world, maybe I would do the same. I don't know. I love this work and I really want to continue it. But I would hope that maybe if the opportunity presents itself, Becks, that you find a sustainable way to go forwards. I would hope that for you. I would hope that for you, because the long-term contributions that are possible through this work could be profound. It might involve slowing down. It might involve doing less immediately. It might involve sharing the burden. It might involve community. It's probably going to involve all of that and then some.
Yeah.
But I really would hope that if you find it and if it's in alignment for you, that we can see you around for longer than the near future, because my opinion is that we need your voice and voices like yours, whether you pass that torch to someone or it is you. We need leaders who are brave, bold, willing, and able to facilitate this. And I so respect what you're doing. I so respect what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. I really appreciate the support. And I get messages of support daily as well, which is really lovely. But I just think that this stuff is so left field, and it's caught a lot of people off, and it's upset a lot of people, because I'm not the first to be doing it, but I'm kind of the first person to put the work out there in such a public way. And that's one of the things that I've been attacked for. Like, somebody recently told me, like, had a problem with the fact that I was making things Facebook palatable. What? She literally attacked me for making things too palatable for Facebook. Like, oh, she's just making it really beautiful for Facebook, like everything's stylized. I was like,
what?
Some of the attacks are just hilarious. And like, all I can do is laugh, because you just think like, what?
Laugh. But people need to know that we're human beings, and there is a very real tax that is placed on people like you and me when that is happening. It's very taxing. It's very taxing. We do care. We do listen. And unfortunately, we do receive. It is bullshit to say that sticks and stones may break my bones. Words can never hurt me. That is rubbish. Rubbish advice. That is 1950s cry it out in the crib stoicism. It's not true. It's not true. We've got to get better about being respectful when you're going up to somebody else, you know?
Or others, we can never move forward. We'll just get stuck in our own bitchy little loop.
Or make your own platform to bitch on. That's what I did. Make your own outlet to bitch on. Do that.
And that's what I've said to people. Like, if you have the skills and if you have the qualifications and you're happy to forego having a career as a vet, like, please start doing it. I don't want to hold the soapbox forever. And that's why I'm writing a book at the moment, because I think the hard part about presenting this work on a platform, a short form platform like Facebook, is that people will take information that you've put in a short post as gospel, and you're like, oh my God, that's a snippet of my ideas around that. But I have to make it, short format enough that somebody actually reads it. And that's the whole point of a book, is like, I want to put that information out there so it's out there for people to find when they want to go looking for it, because I couldn't find any book where everything put together on, like, what are the skeletal variations, what are common problems that you see in racehorses, what are common problems in like a mare's reproductive system, what are common problems through the digestive tract. Like, I see, that's another thing too, like, I see heart variations in thoroughbreds, and in 3 thoroughbreds I found an extra muscle inside of the heart chamber on the left and right side, like literally, chamber like this, a muscle connecting the 2 walls together. And I couldn't find anything about it in any kind of equine literature. And I had to go and find a human heart surgeon who was like, oh yeah, it's an extra muscle, like it doesn't have any consequence. But, I noted that the walls of the heart were much thicker than I would normally see. And I can't see how a connection between 2 sides doesn't restrict blood flow in some way, shape or form. But like, it's just, there's so many things that I see that I can't find any literature. And then, like, I'm a layperson, right? So I don't have access to some of those studies. So then I'll ask the vets, like, can you go hunting for some information on this? And, like, they're flabbergasted. They're as surprised as I am. And when they see things in the dissections, you can see the genuine shock on their face.
Yeah. I had an interview with Temple Grandin last year, who
I was very good.
Massive high school crush on Temple Grandin. I've read all her work. I respect her profoundly, deeply, her contribution. It was really a big deal for me to just call her one day and it's like, hello, is this Temple Grandin? Yes. Hi. And then we had this like off the record conversation prior to recording and then after recording. And there was a moment when I was talking with her about genetic abnormalities in horses and these bony malformations and variations that you're researching. Now, in my opinion, Temple's kind of been at the cutting edge of animal research and animal science for many decades now. And she has been a trailblazer. She's been out there saying things that other people aren't saying. And in my opinion, she's more or less aware of the cutting edge and she keeps herself abreast of the cutting edge. And I'm on a conversation with her off the record and I'm discussing these malformations and variations and she was genuinely confused. And I went, hang on a minute. And I had to explain it to her. I said, well, there are horses getting born with bones that are in the wrong place and bones are in the wrong shape and it's affecting key stabilizing areas of their body and their performance and their well-being and it's affecting all of this. And she went, oh. And I went, hang on a minute. Somewhere between where I was and where I am today, when did it become my job to inform Temple Grandin of this issue? When did that become my job? To inform Temple Grandin of this issue. I think I'm a layperson too. Why? She runs in all the circles. When did that become my job to be the one who informed her? And she said, well, we'll go do some research on that. She circled back to me with an email after the episode and said, I think it's terrible that people are breeding these diseased horses and I'm going to look into it. And listen, if Temple Grandin is terrified or concerned, it's a tsunami on the horizon, then I'm terrified too. When did that become my job? And so that's why I'm talking about the importance of allowing people their voices.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's why,
And you have to be completely arrogant to think that like a malformed rib on one side would not have an effect on the horse's way of going. And that then that compromised way of going would not have an effect somewhere else in the body that's destabilizing to the point where you're going to get early breakdown in one specific area. Like, I just don't think that that's that much of a leap. And this is where I think the actual scientific model needs to move with the times, because I cannot tell you how often I hear vets say, and this is a little bit of a vet bash, but it is what it is. Oh no, that's just behavior. You need to push your horse through that. Any of the people that come to me and the horse has a serious issue and they relay to me, oh no, a vet said it's just behavioral, push them through it, because they cannot relate a lameness to behavioral issues. It just, the scientific model won't allow for it. And I think that's bullshit and that needs to change.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. I did have a vet. I've had a vet up on the podcast who's on maternity leave and was willing to tell stories out of school, and she did. I mean, vets have one of the hardest jobs in the world. If you look at the side effects of the vet industry and what a lot of vets suffer from in terms of mental health, etc., it is the hardest job. But I so agree that we've got to start speaking up. We've got to start being plainly transparent about these issues.
Oh yeah, it's very multifaceted, and like I said earlier, there are benefits to me being a layperson. Like, as sucky as it is for those people who have done all that training and probably are better qualified to do this work than me, they are actually restricted by their own professionalism,
right,
or their own industry. Like, the regulatory bodies are there to control those people and make sure that they don't do anything that steps out of line with the scientific model and the scientific thinking.
It's a deadlock.
It is a deadlock, and people feel locked in literally by that, and they're frustrated. Like, I have these conversations with vets on my dissection. I'm interested to understand the emotional impact of the work, and they really feel that there's not a lot of support for them on that level, even by the industry. And that they're just expected to just shovel that stuff down and not even visit it. And we're humans. Like, it's treating people like robots, and I don't think that's fair either. So, it's a big problem on many levels, not only just for the horses, but for the humans too.
Well,
yeah.
Becks, I've got one more question to ask you today, if I may.
Sure.
What question didn't I ask that you wish I had asked?
Oh.
I know that comes out of left field, but you're a left field kind of gal.
Oh. I feel like we've been quite thorough this time, look.
We have been exceptionally thorough.
I suppose the big thing that I get asked really regularly that people always want to know about is kissing spine. And from my perspective, kissing spine is normally a symptom of other issues going on. And it's just that, for the reasons that I spoke about earlier on, with the spine being basically a suspended swing bridge between two pillars, being the front end and the back end, that when there is a weakness somewhere in the horse's body, it's expressed in the spine because there's so little support there.
And you said that the discs in between the vertebrae are different than in a human because we're bipedal and they're quadrupedal, like they're softer or more malleable somehow. Is that right?
They don't have a liquid center like we do. They just have a hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage connection between the vertebral discs. So they have a lot more flexibility between them, definitely. But it is a slightly different makeup to what our intervertebral disc space. Yeah. So, the reason I think kissing spine is so talked about is because it's easy to get X-rays of, right? So many of the things that I see in a horse's body aren't easily imageable, and until we can walk a horse through a CT machine or an MRI, we're still just going to be scratching the surface of what these variations look like. And the moment you can do that easily and cheaply enough, all of these variations that I'm talking about will start to come to the forefront, and people are going to realize, oh my God, we've bred in all these problems. And if you've got a horse with ECVM and transitional ribs and a poorly placed lumbosacral junction, that horse is not going to be a good riding horse. That horse is a paddock mate, in my opinion.
I know this isn't an 11th hour question. It's a big one. What do you think of kissing spine surgeries?
I hate it. And I've got on my Patreon, I've got X-rays of a 2-star eventer who before and after this kissing spine surgery, and then a couple of years later after the surgery, and all of the DSPs that were shaved, got the bone shaved, grew back worse. Because the body is laying down that bone, in my opinion, for stability.
For a reason.
It's trying to fuse them together to make it one stable structure, right? And so if you start chopping those parts out, the body goes, hang on, I needed those, and it grows them back. And then you have zero control about the way that those actually grow back. So for anybody who wants to see that, it's on my Patreon. If you want, message me, I'll send it to you.
I'd love to see it. I call it the rack of lamb surgery, because it's like filleting the bones for the rack of lamb. And I'm like, what? We don't need to be shaving bones down so that we can, put the diagnosis on the table. I mean, and I've had some people, very well-intentioned, very good to their horses, have this surgery recommended by their vet, and they reached out and said, well, what do you think? And I had to very gently say, please don't. Please don't. Please reconsider.
It's terrible. Yep, absolutely terrible idea, and people don't understand why it's a terrible idea. And so, look, I'm not a fan of the surgery, and I have spoken to quite a few vets on my dissections who have many different ways of dealing with it. Mesotherapy tends to be a good alternative. Some vets are injecting Botox into the horse's back to give the soft tissues enough of a break to sort of get things moving again. But look, it's a huge problem, and I don't think there's any easy answer for it. And one other thing too, quickly before we go, is thoroughbreds actually have a larger DSP. So the dorsospinous process is actually much, much larger than, for example, a standardbreds. Like if I was going to be breeding sound horses, I don't think I'd be breeding with a thoroughbred anymore. I think I'd actually be more likely to breed with a standardbred, because the thoracic spine is actually just better equipped for it. And I think that's something we've just accidentally bred into the thoroughbreds, but the DSPs themselves are much, much larger, and there's just naturally less space in between those DSPs. And I know I'm trashing on thoroughbreds a lot, and I don't want to, because I started out on thoroughbreds. My early pony club career was on thoroughbreds. And it just, it is what it is, and people have really hammered me for, going after thoroughbreds, but I can only talk about what I see, right? And that's what I see.
Thank you for being on the podcast. I'm going to be in New Zealand at the beginning of May. I'd love to see you if it's possible.
I'm aiming to come to your clinic, but I only just get home from my overseas trip then.
Wow. So if you're tired, I understand.
No, it's not tired. I don't think I'm here. But I'm trying to, if nothing else, I would love to fly up and just have lunch or something.
Probably, that would be lovely. I'd love to see you.
Probably lunch, dinner, but it's a short flight up to where you are. But I think I only just get back.
Right. Well, thank you for being here with me today and for everything that you're doing. Take care now, okay?
Oh, welcome. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Lockie.
Bye. You've been listening to the Emotional Horsemanship podcast, and that was Becks Nairns for her second appearance here. I hope you got something out of that. I know I certainly did. Thank you, Becks, for joining me, and if you'd like to connect with Becks Nairns, her links to her social media are provided in the show notes below. And if you'd like to learn more about emotional horsemanship, please go to emotionalhorsemanship.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you next time.